There were migrant rape gangs in England, gangs that would prey on young girls, gang rape them.
The police were actually afraid of being called racist and therefore didn't tackle it.
White girls were seen as easy meat.
We've had girls, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, raped with broken bottles.
Victims and their relatives were arrested in many cases and not the abusers.
This is one of the worst scandals in British history.
For obvious reasons, it's difficult to say whether being the world's richest individual automatically transforms you into the undisputed god of all men, or, more to the point, the god of all governments everywhere, with the power to admonish, condemn, or reward such entities as you see fit. Notwithstanding, multi-billionaire owner of X, Elon Musk himself, has, as at early January 2025, attracted a vast level of support for his condemnation of what he refers to as migrant RAPE gangs, who have, for many, many years now, been systematically exploiting vulnerable white girls without, for the most part, facing any criminal consequences. Best-selling UK writer J.K. Rowling, without whom there would of course be no Harry Potter novels, and also no Scotland-based multi-millionaire social media fanatics forever speaking out against matters relating to transgender women. Just saying. It's just one person who has expressed her own disgust over the matter of long-running and unchecked child sex abuse offences committed by groups of men, usually gangs of friends and relatives from a particular UK demographic. Meanwhile, in the UK Parliament itself, the official opposition has called for a national inquiry into the so-called Grooming Gang scandal in order to derive a fuller picture on how and why so many young British white girls, some having been as young in fact as 11, were able to be sexually exploited in plain sight for so long, if we count from 1997, the point when the infamous Rotherham Grooming Gang was apparently first spoken of, shall we say, and by so many without so much as a look-in from schools, social services and the police. But why is the matter of grooming gangs suddenly coming to everyone's attention now? The voting down of a proposal for a national inquiry into grooming gangs that took place in the House of Commons on the 8th of January 2025 has cemented the answer that Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips offered to Oldham Council in 2024 when they requested that the Home Office should undertake one such inquiry. Mrs Phillips justified her denial of this request on grounds that it was for Oldham Council itself to commission an inquiry locally, just like in the case of both Rotherham and Telford, rather than for the government to step in directly and take charge of any such undertaking. In response to Mrs Phillips' answer, Mr Musk said the minister should be banged up. There's just so much to unpack here, but first, if you're liking what you're watching, do subscribe, give the video a like and drop a comment when you've watched enough of it to do so. Now, due to the topic of this video, the powers that be will probably ban it from showing adverts, so if you hit the thanks button below and send my channel some wonga, hand on heart, I will be your friend for life. Lastly, speaking of YouTube's content moderation process, not wanting to have this video restricted in any further ways is why I'm disguising certain words. Grooming. Winning a person's trust and affection with particular acts and gestures in order to subsequently exploit the person in some way. The gangs who, since at least 1997, have been grooming or manipulating or forcing young British white girls with notable vulnerabilities into SEX work, plus, if you like, into not-for-profit SEX, consist, as I've already mentioned, of groups of friends and relatives. The child SEX ring from Rotherham, which is believed to have systematically you-know-what-tituted and raped as many as 1,400 girls between 1997 and 2013, making them the most prolific gang of PDF files of all those that are known, started when young men took to waiting for girls outside schools and care homes. The girls who were excited by the cigarettes, the alcohol, the drugs and the jewellery that these men gave them for free, all of which the girls willingly accepted, were often from broken homes or from destitute homes or from abusive and violent homes, or all three. Where care homes are concerned, after all, such vulnerabilities in the girls were nigh on guaranteed. being manipulated into feeling as if they were the girlfriends of their abusers, being silenced by the threat of intimate pictures of them, the girls that is, being circulated to their families and friends, being penetrated with broken bottles, being doused with petrol, being gang violated, and being forced to watch other girls being gang violated are, of course, the reasons why so many victims chose to keep quiet about the horrific abuse that they rapidly became subject to at the hands of the said young men, as well as at the hands, fucking literally, of the friends, brothers, uncles and cousins, for instance, of those same young men. Many girls were transported to different towns and cities for the purpose of their pimping. Bristol, Derby and Rochdale, alongside Rotherham, which has had the highest number of victims so far, and both Oldham and Telford are amongst the 50 UK towns and cities where such child RAPE gangs have perpetrated their despicable acts. Now, I have to fact check you here, young Mr. Musk. Deplorable and abhorrent as the acts of these gangs unquestionably are, these aren't gangs of migrants. They're gangs of predominantly Muslim men who are in fact British and who just happen to be of Pakistani descent. It is by far the religious values held by these men, substantially more than it is their ethnicity or any other characteristics of theirs, that influences their atrocious treatment of women and girls. These said religious values come from a convenient yet markedly warped interpretation of their holy book, which indoctrinates them firstly with the view that women don't count, and secondly that white women are barely even human.
You said that imams were promoting grooming rings, and you very clearly laid out you felt that young British men were being poisoned by what they were being taught. Do you think that's still the case?
The theology from the mosque, the theology from the elders and whatever, is to create this idea that there is them and us. So with these girls are so-called whatever, it's all fine. They're all not virgin, they're all immoral, they're all on drugs and drinks and so forth. So you can do whatever you please with them.
I'll stress that these aren't the teachings of the Muslim faith. They're the teachings of women and girl-hating cunts with a cuntish women and girl-hating agenda.
The criminality is actually fueled by the ideology, and the ideology is about an Islamic fundamentalism that has no basis in the Quran.
In her book, Modern Slave, Gaia Cooper, who became an RAPE gang victim at 14, shows what this medieval mindset of her abusers felt like, while also hinting at the mistreatment perpetrated by the same abusers against their own women.
You say in the book that your abusers often called you a white slag. They called you a kafir, which is a derogatory term used to describe white people, and they used the term white trash.
I don't want to say that they don't treat their own kind like that, because I know in some situations they do. They do treat women inferior anyway in their own culture. But I do think me being a non-Muslim white girl made me a plaything, immaterial, like it doesn't matter, almost that I wouldn't have counted. As long as they don't treat their own women like that, then it's fine. We were disposable, like trash basically.
Gaia has just told us that members of child RAPE gangs don't do with their own women what they do with their victims, who are all, as we know, white girls. If you're a girl who is any colour but white, child SEX abuse gangs won't touch you. Why? Hey, we've already uncovered the answer to this, but let's listen to the Tory leader's own explanation anyway.
White girls were seen, as Jack Straw said, as easy meat.
The question of whether anyone would care about PDF file gangs if the victims weren't white or if the perpetrators were white, I'll hopefully be able to answer in another video. Laura Wilson was STABBED 40 times by her pimp, who is thankfully doing time for her murder. Some victims will never ever be the same again, their genitalia having suffered irreparable damage. We've already talked about RAPE by broken glass, drenchings with petrol, gang violations, blackmail by means of photos. We haven't talked about how many RAPE babies have come from these child SEX abuse gangs. But Sammy Woodhouse, for one, whose picture is in the thumbnail to this vid, reports that she has told her own son that he isn't an RAPE baby. He's her baby. And she disagrees that carrying out a national inquiry into child you-know-what-titution rings would be a matter of pandering to the far right.
This is not being far right. This is people and not just only in our country but around the world, having genuine concerns and outrage of what's happened, and very rightly so. Now, let's be very clear on what we're talking about, what's been happening. We are talking about children being groomed, abused, raped, tortured, trafficked, murdered, blamed, ignored, impregnated, criminalised.
When Rotherham victim Emma took clothing that held evidence of her own RAPES to the local police, officers subsequently sent her a cheque for the items, having since clumsily lost them. Celebrated journalist Andrew Norfolk, whose very celebrated reputation comes from his investigative reporting on the Rotherham RAPE gang, shares the experience of a 12-year-old victim who, on being found by police half naked and drunk somewhere with a group of Asian men, found herself getting arrested while the men got to walk away.
People who should have been looking after these girls were effectively turning a blind eye to rape.
For her part, Gaia Cooper, author to remind you of Modern Slave, says that she was failed less by police and more by social services.
Do you also think that the authorities were treating you a bit like that? There's a sense to which, if police officers weren't expressing too many concerns about you, the people in positions of authority were also sort of turning a blind eye to your underage sexual activity with much older men, that to a certain extent they were also treating you, and I'm just quoting this, you know, in the same way as your abusers, like a little slag.
Yeah, in my social care reports, time and time again, it says she's taking risk-taking behaviours. She's making lifestyle choices. She won't stop hanging around with these older men. And it repeats throughout. And it's quite shocking to see that that was their perception of what was going on.
To the police, alleged victims of sexual exploitation gangs were council estate skags who didn't count, one or more officers taking bungs, bribes in other words, from the abusers themselves, allegedly, to ignore reports of abuse. Not wanting to be called racist was another important reason why both police and child protection services failed to act on complaints of RAPE and other forms of violence that a number of girls actually did make against their pimps. Oh, seriously, how fucking pathetic. If you know your investigation isn't based on racism, then you just get the fuck on with it, no matter what people might fucking call you, innit? Also, I think it's safe to assume that when they reported their abusers, the girls stressed to the police or to their social worker what they were risking by speaking up, and just look what they got. Anyway, the Rochdale gangs only unravelled when, in 2011, Nazir Afzal, a British Pakistani barrister, became North West Chief Crown Prosecutor. The man himself remarking that political correctness, the desire to avoid damaging social cohesion by targeting a non-white community to be exact, had, prior to then, held police back from acting on allegations of abuse against the said gangs. Maggie Oliver herself, a former detective constable with Greater Manchester Police, who acted as whistleblower on the botched handling of the Rochdale RAPE gangs and who resigned from her job in 2012, is adamant that this so-called political correctness was a key cause of the police's decisions not to investigate the allegations of abuse or to deliberately sabotage the investigations that they actually did carry out. But Nasrit Mehtab, a former superintendent with the Metropolitan Police, says that the causes of police inaction lie elsewhere and that the dominant perpetrators of child sexual exploitation aren't who we all think they are.
One of the things that you've said in your introduction is that the police were actually afraid of being called racist and therefore didn't tackle it. An independent inquiry that was led in 2023 found actually that wasn't the case, and it wasn't because they were afraid to say the fact that these grooming gangs were of Pakistani origin. You can't deny that. That's fact.
Okay.
His Royal Majesty's Inspectorate did a whole investigation of the grooming gangs, and they looked at 52 cases, and they found out of 27, majority of those cases were white men that were the abusers. The second ethnic group was Pakistani men. There are other issues. The fact that people don't understand sexual exploitation in a group. Police don't have the training. They don't have the resources. And as you said, these victims weren't believed because they were of a particular, they came from.
That's really bad, though, isn't it? That the cops did not believe them because of their backgrounds, because of where they lived, because of the kind of families they were members of.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer says that a national inquiry into PDF file gangs would just take way too long, something like 7 years, that the process of gathering evidence is like trudging through treacle, that a number of local inquiries have already been carried out, and that the victims themselves don't want a national inquiry. Nobody outside of his own government, however, believes him. Kemi Badenoch, leader of the official opposition, arguing that victims do want a national inquiry. The PM has got his way, however, having since defeated by a massive Commons margin the proposal for a national inquiry, as I mentioned earlier. The fact, however, that he whipped, which basically means ordered, his party to vote against the proposal makes us all wonder what the fuck the PM is trying to hide. Is he worried that a national inquiry would expose his own professional failings, given that he was Director of Public Prosecutions when the said child SEX rings were doing what they did, and mainly getting away with it? Or is it to preserve the Pakistani vote? 40% of the Pakistani community having voted Labour in the 2024 election, and the government itself having no fewer than 11 British Pakistani MPs. Who fucking knows? Hey, I'm sorry for the 1,400 Rotherham girls and young women who fell victim to the sick and twisted RAPE gangs, and I'm sorry for all the girls and young women who suffered in the same way at the hands of other gangs. If you've enjoyed this video, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.